So this is some principles of visual communication. It's the kind of thing your artist is going to be thinking about. And some of these might be new and some of these might not be new. Excuse me. All of this or most of this is to the goal of clarity in your story. We have to be like this guy Omak in the blue, punching our way through all the obstacles. So first and foremost, a good question, at least visually, is what do we need to see? And here's some examples where things are silhouetted or darkened out. We don't need to see the entire details. We just need to see the action or the form. We need to see that this lady is scolding Dennis the Menace and his little friends. We don't need to see more about her. We need to see them walking away. We need to see the car crash, not the specifics of this curvy lady, but the car crash. We need to see this crazy villain and maybe his villainous smile, but we don't need to see all his details in this particular panel. We need to see these two wealthy men walking and plotting inside the mansion. We don't really need to see the details of the mansion. We don't need to see the details of the men, not in this particular panel. So both are a little bit blurry. And then in this panel over here, two adults are speaking about the boy, and she managed to get him to eat, and we see the boy, but we don't need to see everything in detail. We just need to see the sort of the interaction between the two adults in just physical sense. You'll see this in color too. All three of these examples, either the foreground here and here, are colored in a single color. It's essentially shading it out so that we can see more of the details elsewhere and focus on two things at once. Sort of the way our eyes work. We can't really focus on too much differentiation of depth at one time. We sort of have to focus on the middle or the back in the foreground. It's happening 3 times here, 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 here. There's another great use of this sort of semi-silhouette. We'll look at silhouettes a tiny bit later. Another thing, and a lot of these are color comics, but in the black and white version we can see it really clearly. Sometimes people will create sort of fake frames around the action. This is a wall behind this monkey. Here's a wall behind Philip K. Dick and these other characters. These are just marks, sort of unifying these two characters here without creating a background. This is a fake sort of light source. It's not really a light. It's just there to frame the action that we need to see. Same thing here. Same thing here. We're creating a frame around the action. We're creating a frame around the character we need to see, or the main action we need to see. Powerful light sources will sometimes draw our attention. Here, the high contrast happening everywhere here. A strong light source might be good for creating a sense of late day gunfight here, these long shadows, but they all point in the direction of the main character here, all these shadows. Excuse me, your artist will be hopefully interested in strong acting, and by that I mean characters that are convincing, that are particular, that are nuanced, all these things. This is a great Jughead drawing. Look at that. This character who's being held up and sort of abused by Darkseid there. This Robert Crumb drawing. This Jaime Hernandez drawing. Any Jaime Hernandez drawing for that matter. These 3 characters in this pogo, all doing something very, very different, with different body language, even different personalities in their movements. Again, this character here from Jack Kirby hollering at this guy who's very submissive. More great acting from Will Eisner here, Jaime Hernandez here, and Will Eisner again here. His guy looking into a microscope or something. They're very vibrant bodies. They're moving like real people. Maybe they're moving a bit more broadly than real people. They're miming maybe a little bit, but it's communicates very well. More from Dave Sim, from Hank Ketchum, and I don't know who this is. I can't remember who that is, to be honest. But again, very particular actions and reactions and faces and gestures. So your artist is going to be thinking about silhouettes too, and not just creating silhouettes, although this is masterfully done here by Jaime Hernandez, but also how the characters look in just their shape form. This is a great example from Brett Blevins. The same character, he's got his finger pointed, he's flying through the air or whatever, but if we black him out, he's just this kind of nebulous shape. We really can't make sense of it. We turn him a little bit or turn our eye a little bit. Now this character makes sense. We can identify most of the limbs and we can identify the action just as a shape. And this is an important thing to think about as we're rendering characters and as your artist is rendering characters. So there's some great examples here on this page. These dogs are tearing apart this person that just fell off this cart, this sleigh. And another example, we can see it working even in what looks like a pretty simple, maybe static Tintin page. When we blacken the characters out, we can see Captain Haddock running away, sort of angrily. The drinking sequence here, the heavy bag here. There's lots of, even the great silhouettes here of all the bags, because the legs are so specific, and the foreground and the background is working really well together. The personalities here, silhouettes, the shape of the characters in the panel is really important. They'll also have to think about strong design. And by design, I mean the movements or the placement of shapes inside the panel. And all of these really could be completely separate lectures and separate presentations, and certainly composition and design could be. But there's just a nice way that this man is fits within her arm and the rest of her body in the color here. These bodies fitting really beautifully well together inside this shape. Jaime Hernandez does it all the time. Every panel of his is gorgeous. The way this character is just sort of arched over top of the rest of this, the way these two characters are sort of moving together in this rubbery way, the way they sort of accentuate each other. Strong page composition is really important, and that's a whole nother section. We'll look at that. Bill Watterson was a master once he sort of freed himself up from the limitations of the standard comic strip page. Even then he was, but he did a particular business decision that gave him more freedom, and he made some fabulous compositions after a while. Strong sense of place is important. This is just a beautiful street scene from Jesse Marsh. All of these also, this enormous castle, the superhero sort of hall here with their big board and their big table. This overgrown foliage outside this door here. They are entering through the archway of the castle here. The swamp, the Victorian house up here, the strange street full of eyeball signs here, and even this sort of windswept graveyard here. All great sense of place. This sense of place brings us to the idea of establishing shots. Any artist worth their salt is going to give you establishing shots now and then to show you where the action is happening. This might be, in this case, like Dan Clow's Ring, Ring, Ring. We see the city, we see the Welcome to Schneiderville, we see the hotel, and then we see the character. But the dialogue starts early on. Here we get a city scene. We get a little closer down to street level, and now we see the bear and the main character. Same thing, apartment block. Now we see inside the apartment, and now we see the main character, and we know the person, and we know the kind of place she lives in. This tree down here is really beautiful. Where's that tree? It's in this enormous park, and we see that earlier rather than later. This jungle warfare scene here, we need to see that early on so that these close-ups can actually mean something. All these close-ups don't have trees in the background. We don't get a sense of place, but that sense of place is given to us right here. And probably on the next page we get another establishing shot. This big house, so we know everything happening here is happening in that house. Likewise, this is sort of zombie apocalypse here happening in this house. We get another establishing shot so we can get a sense of how many zombies are walking around. This is happening in this school, these close-ups. We see the bricks again, it connects us. Here's the window washers again. This is from that same story. lots of shots of the window washers, but especially the cityscape, and then the side of the building. Sometimes I like to say that we need to give ourselves something to follow from panel to panel. This woman's arm, you can follow it from panel to panel. It's kind of an elegant movement. You see this woman and this fire hydrant as they're far apart and then close together. It's a simple thing, but sometimes people forget what we are paying attention to as viewers. His arm and his orange cloak, and then whoosh, that arm spreads out, that cloak goes flying. This cat vomit, that cat vomit here is really important. No, paper is for Kitty, for Kitty. We see the cat walking away from its own vomit as David is trying to clean it up, and I think that's a really important thing. It wouldn't be as funny if the vomit weren't there in the second panel. This is an interesting one because this hat becomes the brick as it gets thrown. The hat's disappeared, but this sort of is the exact same shape and size of it, so we're sort of tracking it anyway. The gloves, the important thing here, the clubs go in, the gloves are like, wiped clean. This one we read right to left. It's a little, there's some strange subtext here. He says, what? She says, I'm in my 4th month now. She's pregnant. This hose with its subtext is what we follow as the camera changes so significantly from looking down and into this, or from looking up and into the sky to looking down and towards her, and the camera completely flips. But this hose and this hand help us manage that movement through the panels. And lettering could easily be its own course to itself, but here's 2 nice examples of Craig Thompson really paying attention to lettering. They're wildly different books, same author. The lettering here, playful, mixing of lowercase and uppercase. Here, it's a little more elegant. It's a little closer to handwriting. Really beautiful. There's an art and skill and craft to lettering. You can see it here in this Walt Kelly just by looking underneath the letters to see how much thought, lines, and penciling of letters and stuff goes on. Title lettering is a whole nother situation. Also, this part here was lettered in white on top of the black, and then you get Robert Crumb's really, really, really in-depth title. Even here, paying attention to lettering is an important part of the visual landscape that you're creating. Will Eisner, in every Spirit comic, made a fabulous display of his title, The Spirit by Will Eisner, Fox at Bay. So that's a lot of what your artist is going to be thinking about, and what they're going to be doing. Very simple, typical artist process looks something like this after they've been given a script. This is from Lustal. Simple thumbnails. They might whip through these, a few of these in just 10 minutes or something if they're in a real good groove. Then they're going to focus on one and tighten it up. Now we're looking at sort of pencils. Note the difference. This is sort of just getting a sense of the pacing. This is getting a sense of the rhythm and how it's going to move through time. Now we're creating a sense of mood with the drawings, and they're having their own personality. And then there'll be some finishes, either inks or strong pencil here. And in this case, the pencils became the base for some color that went on top. And notice it didn't get lettered until this case, but the place for the lettering was here. And probably there's a draft where the lettering is sort of penciled loosely in there. And there's the color. So that gives you a sense of what your artist, whether it's you or someone else, is going to be thinking about. There's a ton of things to think about in comics. And that's just some of them in shallow detail. There's plenty more.